Several years ago, I made this spell book that was inspired by the book from Hocus Pocus for a Halloween prop. It was just one of those papier-mâché books that you can find at the craft store that I decorated. And I thought, why not try to make another version that's a little bit more practical? So I tried to make a tablet cover in this same style. So here's how I did it. I started with 4 sheets of thick craft foam. No, it's not the thin sheets that you can get at the craft store, it's the little thicker ones. These are about 1/4 of an inch thick each. So I took 4 of them, traced around my iPad, and then cut out that section out of the middle of the foam. And I did this for 2 pieces. And on one of those pieces, I attached elastic straps to each of the corners, and these will be used to hold the iPad in place. So I just cut some pieces of elastic and then glued them down with some E6000 glue. And then I sandwiched that elastic section in between the 2 pieces of the cut foam, to put the 2 pieces of cut foam together. And I also cut a notch out of the side, if you can see here at the bottom, to accommodate the buttons on the side of the tablet as well. Then I cut a notch out of the bottom of both of those pieces after they've been glued together, so that you'd have room to put your phone or your headphones in there, or your charging cord. And then glued this entire thing down to just an uncut piece of foam. Once again, using some E6000. And I didn't really care much about lining up the edges of the foam because I wanted it to look like book pages anyway. So that was helpful because these pieces of foam are not exactly the same size. So then I measured out my foam on a piece of chipboard, which is kind of just like a really thick cardboard. You can get this at the craft store as well. I usually use this when I'm making covers for books, doing book binding. And I cut out 2 pieces for the covers, and then I put my book pages in the inside of the covers to measure how wide the spine would be. And just took my ruler to measure the width of the spine, and then marked out and cut the spine the same length as the covers and the same width that I had measured. Then I laid these out, spacing them about 1/8 of an inch between each of the covers and the spine, and then covered the entire thing with some masking tape to keep it all in place. And this also added a little bit of extra protection as well. And then I took the tip of my pencil and just creased those gap sections in between the spine and the covers. And to make it look like it was made of old leather, or actually human skin as the original book was made, I covered the whole thing with a layer of tissue paper and Mod Podge. I just put a layer of Mod Podge down, wrinkled up the tissue paper, attached it on top, and then put another layer of Mod Podge over the top to seal it. Once this was dry, I lined the inside of the tablet cover with some felt. And this was just to cover it up, make it look a little nicer, and then also add a little bit more extra protection to the tablet as well, give it some more padding. And I just glued this down with some E6000 as well. I didn't have a big enough piece of felt to do the entire inside with one piece, so I cut 2 sections for the sides and then a strip in the middle to cover up the middle section where the spine is. Then on the outside of the cover, I needed to make it look as if it was pieces of skin that had been stitched together. So I used some paper clay, sketched out where my seams would be with a pencil, and then just made some ridges basically with some paper clay. I wanted it to look like as if the pieces of skin had dried and gotten old and were kind of separating a little bit. So I put the ridges and then just drew a line with a modeling tool down the center to make a little gap where the stitches would go across. And then I used a pencil to put some holes for the stitches later on. While that was drying, I used Polymer Clay to make all the embellishments for the outside of the book. I started with a ball of foil that I covered with clay to make the eyeball. And of course, once I made it, I realized it was a little bit too big, so I had to cut it down and make it a little bit smaller. And then I rolled out a snake of clay and cut out some little medallions for the corners, using a jar of puffy paint as a template. And then use the snake of clay to make snakes on the medallions. I needed 4 of these, 2 for the front and 2 for the back. And then for the closure, I did another snake of clay, wound it around to make the little circular part of the closure that goes around the eye, and I attached a magnetic closure. Half of it went in the paper clay, where it would touch the front of the book, and then the other half I stuck in the actual polymer clay. So I just lined up where those things would go so that they would meet and got the shape that I wanted. And along the spine of the book there's a strip of clay with a snake going down it, and I just ran some clay through my pasta roller to make it an even thickness all the way through. Cut out the strip of clay and then rolled out another snake and made another snake on top of that strip. To go along with the closure, I made a piece to go across the spine of the book, or at least around the front of the book as well, so that the closure would wrap around from the back and actually close. Once everything was baked and dried, I covered all the metallic pieces with a coat of black paint first. And then when that dried, I took some silver paint and dry brushed over top of it to give it an old worn metal look. And after several coats of white on the eyeball, I then used a couple tones of green paint to paint the pupil, or the iris, in the center, and then black to paint the pupil. And then took some red to make some veins on the eyeball as well. Once that was all dry, I then used E6000 to glue the eyeball to the front of the book. And then used some paper clay to form the eyelid to help hold the eyeball in place. I then glued the actual tablet holder on the inside. I put one sheet of foam on the left half, and then my sandwich piece where the section was cut out of the middle onto the right half. I just glued them into the center of each part of the cover. And then gave the whole thing a coat of paint. I mixed up this reddish brown color as a base color. And then used a tan to dry brush to hit the highlights of the rest of the cover. When that was dry, I added the stitches, which is a technique I borrowed from another YouTuber, Sea Lemon, in her version of this book as well. She used puffy paint. In my original one, I actually cut pieces of string and glued each one individually. This puffy paint worked a whole lot better. Now, the only color of puffy paint they had, though, at the store was white, and I didn't want stark white stitches. So once they were dry, I took a paintbrush and gave them a little coat with the tan, just to darken them up a bit. Then the only thing that was left was to glue all the embellishments to the front, which I did using a combination of hot glue and E6000. I then had glued my closure pieces to a couple of hinges so that it would wrap around the side of the book as you see here. So I just put the front portion where it needed to go, marked where the hinge met on the back of the book, and then glued it into place. And I'm very happy with how it turned out. The hinge wraps around and closes the book, my tablet's here on the inside, and I can actually stand it up and use it as a stand as well, so I can watch videos. So there you go. There's the final product.